When Officer David Carter's daughter was sent home from school wearing nothing but a diaper, he believed the teacher's arrest would finally bring justice for this cruel act of racism. But the community's reaction to the accusations against a respected white teacher left the Carter family stunned, revealing just how difficult it would be to seek justice in a system reluctant to act. Little did they know, this humiliating incident was only the tip of the iceberg. What they uncovered would expose the true monster that had been lurking behind the teacher's respected facade. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, comment where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. The police station felt heavy with tension as David Carter sat with his wife Ava and daughter Mia in a small interview room. The events of the past few days bore deeply on all of them, evident in the dark circles under their eyes and the tension in their postures. Mia had just finished giving her full testimony about the incident at school with her abusive teacher, Mr. Calloway, who had taken her skirt and sent her home wearing only her diaper. As Mia recounted the humiliating experience, David felt a mixture of rage towards Calloway and guilt for not realizing sooner what his daughter had been enduring. He watched as Mia's small hands fidgeted nervously in her lap, her voice wavering at times as she spoke. Ava kept a comforting arm around their daughter's shoulders, offering quiet words of encouragement when Mia struggled to continue. When the interview was finally over, David knelt down in front of Mia and took her hands in his. "You did so well, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you for being brave and telling the truth." Mia gave a small nod, her eyes downcast. "Is it over now, Daddy? Can we go home?" David exchanged a glance with Ava before responding. "Yes, honey, Mommy's going to take you home now to rest. I need to stay here a little longer to finish some work, but I'll be home as soon as I can." As they stood to leave, David pulled Ava aside while Mia gathered her things. "The school is under police investigation now," he explained in a low voice. "They've requested full closure, and all learning has been moved online for the next 3 days. Ava nodded, processing the information. "That's probably for the best. Mia needs some time to recover from all this anyway." "I was thinking the same thing," David agreed. "If Mia wants to take a full week or even 2 weeks away from school, that should be fine. We can talk to her about it when I get home." They made their way out of the interview room and through the bustling station. As they approached the main entrance, one of David's fellow officers, Jack Thompson, approached them. "Hey, Carter, I heard what happened." "I'm so sorry you're going through this," Jack said, his expression sympathetic. "Listen, I'm about to head out on patrol. If you want, I can give Ava and Mia a ride home, save you from having to leave right now." David considered the offer for a moment, before nodding gratefully. "That would be great, thanks, Jack, I appreciate it." As Jack led Ava and Mia towards his patrol car, David knelt down once more to say goodbye to his daughter. He kissed her forehead gently, his heart aching at the lingering fear he saw in her eyes. "Get some rest, sweetheart. I'll be home as soon as I can, okay?" Mia nodded, managing a small smile. "Okay, Daddy, be careful." David watched as they climbed into Jack's car, a mixture of emotions swirling within him. As the car pulled away, Ava caught his eye through the window, mouthing, "Be careful," with a worried expression. With a deep breath, David turned and re-entered the station, his mind already shifting gears to the investigation ahead. He made his way through the familiar corridors until he reached the office of his senior detective, Mark Lawson. Lawson looked up as David entered, his face grave. "Carter, come in, we need to talk about Calloway." David took a seat across from Lawson's desk, his body tense. "What's the situation?" Lawson leaned back in his chair with a sigh. "He's been processed and interrogated, but he's not talking. He's demanding a lawyer." David's jaw clenched. "I want to see him." Lawson shook his head. "I don't think that's a good idea, Carter. You're too close to this case." "I can handle it," David insisted. "Maybe he'll say something if he sees me. I promise to keep myself calm." Lawson studied him for a long moment before reluctantly nodding. "All right, but I'm coming with you. We do this by the book, understood? David nodded, standing up. Understood. They made their way to the holding cells, the air growing thicker with tension with each step. As they approached Calloway's cell, David could feel his heart rate increasing, his fists clenching involuntarily at his sides. Richard Calloway sat on the small cot in his detention cell, his posture relaxed despite his surroundings. When he saw David and Lawson approach, a smug smile spread across his face. "Well, well, Officer Carter, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Calloway's voice dripped with sarcasm. David took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. "We need to talk about the drugs we found in your desk, Calloway. How long have you been using? Where did you get them?" Calloway's smile never faltered. "I've already told your colleagues. I'm not saying anything without my lawyer present." David pressed on, ignoring the warning look from Lawson. "Those lollipops are dangerous, especially in a school setting. You need to tell us where you got them." A glint appeared in Calloway's eyes, and he leaned forward slightly. "You know, I heard a sweet, innocent voice earlier. Was that little Mia? Such a shame she had to come here." David felt his blood begin to boil, but he forced himself to remain outwardly calm. "This isn't about Mia, this is about you and the drugs." Calloway chuckled, a sound that sent chills down David's spine. "Oh, but isn't it all about Mia?" Sweet, innocent Mia in her little diaper. "You know, I might be willing to talk if you bring her here. I've missed her so." In that moment, David saw red. It took every ounce of his self-control not to reach through the bars and throttle Calloway. Lawson must have sensed the shift in David's demeanor, because he placed a warning hand on his shoulder. Calloway, sensing he had struck a nerve, pressed on. "You want to know about the drugs? Why don't we talk about the moment your precious daughter wet herself in class because she refused to wear her diaper? It wasn't really my fault, you know. She took it off during recess." David's voice came out as a low growl. "You better watch what you say very carefully, Calloway." But Calloway was on a roll now, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, you should have seen her slipping in her own pee as she ran out of the class. If I hadn't been there to catch her, who knows what might have happened. I chased her to the bathroom, changed her wet skirt, helped her put on her diaper." Calloway winked wickedly and stretched a grin. "You're lucky I was just punishing her by sending her home like that. She's such a reckless girl, you know. She needs to be taught a lesson." Something inside David snapped. With a roar of fury, he lunged forward, his hands gripping the cell bars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You sick bastard! If you touched her, I swear to God." Calloway laughed, the sound echoing off the cell walls. No, don't worry. I looked away. I didn't do anything to her yet." It took both Lawson and another nearby officer to pull David away from the cell. They dragged him into the corridor, where David shook them off, his chest heaving with rage. Lawson's face was stern as he addressed David. "Carter, don't get me wrong. I'm not punishing you, but it's clear you're too close to this case. I can't have you jeopardizing our night shift operation at the cartel's warehouse tonight. Take some time off. Be with your family. Your daughter needs you. Come back on Monday or next week, whenever you're ready." David ran a hand through his hair, the adrenaline slowly fading from his system. "I'm sorry, Mark, you're right. I shouldn't have lost control like that." Lawson's expression softened slightly. "It's understandable, given the circumstances, but we need to handle this by the book if we want to make sure Calloway pays for what he's done and if we want to dismantle the cartel's operation." David nodded, feeling suddenly drained. "You're right, I'll head home, spend some time with Mia and Ava." As he made his way back to his desk to gather his things, David couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his stomach. He knew the fight was far from over, but for now he needed to focus on helping his family heal. He collected his badge and his service weapon, which he always unloaded before bringing home for efficiency as an undercover cop. As he walked towards the exit, several officers patted him on the back, offering words of support and congratulations for the day's success. But as David stepped out into the cool evening air, he couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey for his family. As David settled into the driver's seat of his car, The events of the day began to replay in his mind. The weight of everything that had happened, Mia's testimony, the confrontation with Calloway, the discovery of the drugs, pressed down on him like a physical force. He sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to process it all. His mind wandered to the potential outcomes of the case against Calloway. Despite the seriousness of the situation, David knew from experience that without hard evidence of actual abuse, the charges might not be as severe as he hoped. The incident with Mia's skirt could potentially be argued as a misguided disciplinary approach, especially since Calloway claimed it was due to Mia refusing to wear her diaper, despite her medical condition. As for the drugs found in the classroom, there was no direct proof that they belonged to Calloway, or that he was using them at the time of his arrest. A smart lawyer could potentially argue reasonable doubt. David exhaled heavily, frustration building within him. He hoped that in the coming weeks and months the police would uncover more evidence linking Calloway to the drug cartel that they're investigating day and night, as well as any additional proof of drug possession or distribution at the school. The drive home seemed to pass in a blur, David's mind consumed with thoughts of the case and worries about his family. Before he knew it, he was pulling into his driveway. He parked the car in the garage, going through his usual routine of securing his weapon. He placed the unloaded gun in its case in the glove compartment, alongside the separate magazine, before switching off the engine and stepping out. As he entered the house, he was greeted by the sight of Mia and Ava in the living room. Mia was curled up on the couch watching TV, while Ava was tidying up some toys scattered on the floor. Both looked up as he entered, surprise evident on their faces. "David," Ava said, straightening up, "I thought you were going on the night shift mission." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Change of plans. I talked to Calloway at the station. Things got heated, and Lawson thought it best if I took some time off." Ava's expression softened with understanding. She crossed the room to him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Oh, honey, are you okay?" David nodded, though he didn't quite meet her eyes. "Yeah, I'm fine, it's been a long day." Mia piped up from the couch, her voice small but curious. "Did Mr. Calloway hurt you, Daddy?" A sad smile crossed David's face as he moved to sit beside his daughter. "No, sweetheart, and we'll make sure he won't be able to hurt anyone else. These things take time, you know, but we're doing everything we can." Ava joined them on the couch, her brow furrowed with concern. "David, I know you wanted to follow through with this investigation, especially now that you've found a lead with the drugs. Are you sure you're okay with stepping back?" David sighed, leaning back into the cushions. "I don't like it, but Lawson's right. I'm too close to this case. I need to focus on our family right now." He turned to Mia, managing a small smile. "Speaking of which, what do you two think about doing something fun tomorrow, since we're all off school and work?" Mia's face lit up at the suggestion. "Can we go on a picnic?" "To the national park?" David and Ava exchanged a look, both seeing the opportunity to help their daughter find some joy after the trauma she'd endured. "That sounds like a great idea," Ava said, ruffling Mia's hair affectionately. As they discussed plans for the next day, David felt some of the tension from earlier begin to ease. The case against Calloway was far from over, but for now he could focus on what mattered most, helping his family heal and move forward. The conversation was interrupted by a loud growl from David's stomach, prompting laughter from Mia and Ava. "Sounds like someone's hungry," Ava teased, standing up. "Come on, I've got dinner ready. We can eat together as a family for once." As they moved to the dining room, David felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. Despite the challenges they faced, they were together, supporting each other, and for now that was enough. The weeks and months following the incident at the school were far from easy for the Carter family. After a week of rest, during which Mia slowly began to regain some of her usual cheerfulness, David returned to work with a mixture of determination and apprehension. His first day back, he was met with disappointing news from Detective Lawson. "I'm sorry, Carter," Lawson said, his face grim. "More of our informants have gone missing. The higher-ups have put our undercover operation on hold, pending review and further direction. David felt a surge of frustration. But what about the lead we found with the drugs in the school? We can't just let that go cold. Lawson shook his head. I know, and believe me, I'm as frustrated as you are, but our hands are tied for now. We have to wait for clearance before we can proceed. As the days turned into weeks, David found himself struggling with the feeling of helplessness. He threw himself into his regular duties, but the knowledge that the larger investigation was stalled gnawed at him constantly. Meanwhile, Mia's return to school brought its own set of challenges. Despite the school's efforts to maintain confidentiality, word of the incident had spread. Mia found herself the subject of whispers and stares, her classmates treating her like some kind of curiosity. "Mom, Dad," Mia said one evening, her voice trembling slightly. "Everyone keeps looking at me funny at school. They all know I wear diapers now, and being a cop's daughter doesn't help. They think I'm different." Ava pulled Mia into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry you're going through this. Remember, there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect just the way you are." David knelt down beside them, his heart aching for his daughter. "Mia, honey, you're so much more than what those kids see. You're smart and kind and brave. Don't let anyone make you feel less than that." Despite their words of encouragement, Mia continued to struggle. The math class that had once been a source of frustration now became a daily ordeal, even with a new teacher. The subject matter wasn't getting any easier, and Mia's confidence had taken a severe hit. As if the school situation wasn't difficult enough, the family also had to contend with the ongoing legal proceedings against Calloway. Each time Mia had to testify or even just attend a hearing, the trauma of that day seemed to resurface. The nights following these court appearances were always the hardest. Mia would have nightmares, refusing to sleep alone in her room. She would crawl into David and Ava's bed, seeking comfort between them, as she tried to escape the memories that haunted her dreams. Ava, seeing the toll the situation was taking on their daughter, made the decision to reduce her work hours. She wanted to be there for Mia, to be an anchor for her during this tumultuous time. "I can pick up some night shifts at that 24-hour cafe in town," she told David one night after Mia had finally fallen asleep. "That way, I can be home when Mia gets back from school." David nodded, grateful for Ava's sacrifice but guilty that she had to make it. "I wish I could do more," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. "I feel like I'm failing her, failing both of you." Ava reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're not failing anyone, David. You're doing everything you can. We all are. We'll get through this together." As the months wore on, the strain on the family became increasingly apparent. David found himself constantly on edge, his mind always partially occupied with the case, even when he was at home. Ava was exhausted from juggling her new work schedule and Mia's needs, and Mia, despite their best efforts, seemed to be withdrawing more and more into herself. Then came the day of Calloway's sentencing hearing. David had marked it on his calendar weeks in advance, but as the day approached, he made the difficult decision not to let Mia attend. He and Ava agreed it would be too emotionally taxing for her to face Calloway again. So on that fateful morning, David kissed Ava and Mia goodbye, his heart heavy as he headed to the courthouse alone. He was there out of a sense of duty, to deliver a victim impact statement on behalf of his family and to see justice served. The courtroom was packed as David took his seat. He listened with growing anger as Calloway's lawyer presented his case, painting a picture of a dedicated teacher who had made a regrettable error in judgment. When it was his turn to speak, David poured his heart out, describing how Calloway's actions had affected Mia personally, their family as a whole, and the broader black community. As the judge announced the sentence, David felt the ground vanish beneath him. Calloway had struck a plea deal, receiving only 3 years of probation and the revocation of his license to work with children. No jail time. David left the courthouse that day feeling more defeated than he ever had in his life. The system he had dedicated his life to upholding had failed his daughter, failed his family. The anger and frustration that had been simmering for months threatened to boil over. When he arrived home, the look on his face told Ava everything she needed to know. Mia, picking up on the tension, retreated to her room without a word. 3 years probation and revocation of his working license, David said, his voice hollow. That's all. No jail time. Ava's face fell, tears welling up in her eyes. Oh, David, I'm so sorry. As they held each other, both feeling the weight of their disappointment and fear for the future, they knew that the road ahead would be even harder than they had imagined. But they also knew that they had no choice but to keep moving forward, for Mia's sake and for their own. 3 weeks after the sentencing hearing, on a quiet Sunday morning, David found himself in the backyard, working on repairing a section of fence that had fallen victim to years of changing weathers. The repetitive motions of sanding and replacing boards provided a welcome distraction from the thoughts that had been plaguing him since the trial. As he worked, he heard the back door open and close. Glancing over his shoulder, he saw Mia emerge onto the terrace, taking a seat at the outdoor table. Ava followed close behind, carrying a plate of toast and chicken nuggets, Mia's favorite breakfast. David watched as Ava set the plate in front of Mia, then took a seat beside her. In Ava's hand was a pale envelope, which she placed on the table between them. "What's that?" David called out, pausing in his work. Ava looked up, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension on her face. "It came in the mail, probably yesterday or a few days ago. It's addressed to Mia." Intrigued, David set down his tools and made his way over to the table. Mia was already opening the envelope, her small fingers carefully tearing at the seal. As Mia unfolded the paper inside, her eyes widened slightly. "It's an invitation," she said, her voice quiet but clear, "to Hannah Susie's baptism." Ava's face lit up with recognition. "Hannah? That's your cousin from my side of the family, isn't it?" Mia nodded, her eyes still fixed on the invitation. David leaned in, reading over her shoulder. "It says the baptism is today, Sunday morning at 11 a.m., following the Sunday school service at 10 a.m. Ava glanced at her watch. "It's only 8 a.m. now. We have time if you want to go, Mia." David studied his daughter's face carefully. It had been weeks since Mia had shown interest in anything outside their home, let alone expressed a desire to be around other people. Part of him worried that it might be too soon, that she wasn't ready, but another part recognized this as a potential step forward. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Do you want to go?" Mia was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the invitation. Then, to both David and Ava's surprise, she nodded. I think I'd like to go," she said softly. "I miss being around friends, and Sunday school sounds nice. No one there knows what happened to me, not like at school." David and Ava exchanged a look, a mixture of hope and concern passing between them. "All right then," Ava said, standing up. "Let's get ready. We'll need to leave by 9:30 to make it on time." As Ava led Mia back into the house to get changed, David began gathering up his tools. The fence repair would have to wait. He couldn't shake the feeling that this outing, as simple as it seemed, might be a turning point for their family. 30 minutes later, David found himself in the bathroom, scrubbing the dirt and sawdust from his hands. He could hear Ava and Mia moving about upstairs, the sounds of drawers opening and closing, and quiet conversation drifting down. As he dried his hands, David caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than he remembered. But there was also a glimmer of something else there, hope perhaps, or determination. By 9:30 they were all ready to go. David had changed into a neat shirt and long khaki pants, while Ava and Mia both wore dresses. As they climbed into the car, David couldn't help but remember the last time they had all dressed up like this for one of Calloway's court appearances. He pushed the thought away, determined not to let the past overshadow this moment. Before starting the car, David reached into the glove compartment and retrieved his badge, slipping it into his pocket. It was a habit ingrained in him through years on the force. Always have your badge with you, just in case. As they pulled out of the driveway, David glanced in the rearview mirror at Mia. She was looking out the window, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched the neighborhood pass by. It was the most relaxed he had seen her in weeks. "So, Hannah Sousa," David said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Tell me about her, Mia. It's been a while since we've seen that side of the family, hasn't it?" Mia's brow furrowed slightly as she thought. I don't remember much about her," she admitted. "We haven't seen each other in a long time." Ava turned in her seat to face Mia. "Hannah is your second cousin, sweetie. Her mum, Aunt Clara, is my cousin. You two used to play together when you were little, at family reunions. Do you remember?" A spark of recognition flashed in Mia's eyes. "Oh, was she the one with the really curly hair, who always wanted to play hide-and-seek?" Ava laughed. "That's right, you two were quite the pair back then." As they continued to reminisce about past family gatherings, David felt a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in months, it felt like they were just a normal family, heading out for a normal Sunday morning. Little did he know that this brief respite would be short-lived, and soon they would face another harrowing ordeal that would test their family's strength once again. They arrived at the church with time to spare, joining the stream of people climbing the steep stairs to the immaculate, grand wooden doors. At the entrance, they were greeted by a group of ushers who handed them liturgy papers and directed them towards the main hall. As they entered, David couldn't help but notice that the congregation was predominantly white. He felt a momentary twinge of unease, remembering Calloway's racist remarks, but he pushed the thought aside. This was a place of worship, of community. They were here for Hannah, for Mia. They found seats near the back of the hall, and Ava settled in to save their spots while David took Mia to find the Sunday school room. Following the flow of children and their parents, they made their way down a side corridor to a smaller wooden door. Inside, they were greeted by a kind-faced woman who introduced herself as Martha Graciela. David explained that they were new and there for Hannah's baptism, and Martha's face lit up with recognition. "Of course, Hannah's such a lovely girl. The baptism will be held after the Sunday school service at 11, Martha explained. She went on to describe how the children would gather for songs before splitting into age groups for Bible lessons. As they talked, David scanned the room, finally spotting Hannah. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. At least Mia would know someone here. "Mia," he said softly, kneeling down to her level, "I see Hannah over there. Why don't you go say hello? I'll wait here for a bit to make sure you're settled, okay?" Mia nodded, a mix of nervousness and excitement on her face, as she made her way over to her cousin. David watched as the two girls greeted each other, Mia's initial shyness quickly giving way to animated conversation as the girls warmed up to each other. After a few minutes, Mia looked back at David and gave him a small wave, signaling that she was okay. With a final word of thanks to Martha, who promised to keep an eye on Mia, David made his way back to the main hall. As he settled into the pew next to Ava, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to hope that things might finally be looking up for their family. As the service began, David found himself swept up in the atmosphere of reverence and community. The priest's voice echoed through the hall, followed by the harmonious voices of the choir. When the congregation stood to sing hymns, David and Ava rose with them, their voices joining the collective sound that filled the space. While holding the hymn book, David's eyes wandered, taking in the intricate details of the church's interior. The vaulted ceilings were adorned with paintings of angels and saints, their faces serene and watchful. Ornate statues lined the columns, their stone eyes seeming to follow the movements of the congregation. As his gaze swept across the room, a figure entering through the main doors at the back caught his attention. The man's build and the way he moved seemed eerily familiar. David's heart rate quickened as he realized why the figure bore a striking resemblance to Richard Calloway. David's body tensed, his eyes straining to follow the man as he made his way to the other side of the room, quickly blending in with the standing congregation. He couldn't be sure it was Calloway, he hadn't seen the man's face, but the similarity was undeniable just from behind. Ava, noticing David's sudden agitation, leaned in close. "What's wrong?" she whispered, concern evident in her voice. David shook his head slightly, not wanting to alarm her. "Nothing," he murmured back. "I just thought I saw someone I knew." The person behind them cleared their throat pointedly, clearly annoyed by their whispering. David fell silent, but his mind was racing. Could it really be Calloway? What would he be doing here? As the hymn ended and everyone sat down, David leaned in close to Ava again. "I think I saw Calloway," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ava's eyes widened in shock. "Here, that's impossible," she whispered back. "It can't be him. You're probably just seeing things because you're stressed." David nodded, trying to convince himself that Ava was right. After all, Calloway had no particular distinguishing features, just a typical short haircut like many other men. It was probably just someone who looked similar from behind. As the priest began to speak again, David tried to focus on the sermon, but his mind kept wandering. He found himself scanning the congregation, looking for the man he'd seen earlier. But in the sea of faces, he couldn't spot him again. Ava must have sensed his continued unease because she reached over and squeezed his hand gently. When he looked at her, she mouthed, "Are you okay?" David gave a small nod, but he knew he wasn't convincing. He leaned in close again, his lips nearly touching Ava's ear as he whispered, "I'm sorry. It's just, I'm a police officer. It's hard to just enjoy the hymn and be at peace." Ava's expression softened with understanding. She turned her head slightly, her own whisper barely audible. "Maybe we should make this a new habit coming to church. It might help you find some peace and time to wind down." David considered her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe immersing himself in this environment of faith and community could help him process everything that had happened, help him find a way forward for their family. As the sermon continued, David tried to focus on the words being spoken about redemption in Christ and the hope of salvation. But despite his best efforts, his mind kept circling back to Calloway. The idea that the man who had hurt his daughter could be seeking redemption, could be in the same building as Mia, made his stomach churn. After about 30 minutes, the tension became too much. David leaned over to Ava once more. "I'm going to use the restroom," he whispered, "and maybe check on Mia." Ava nodded, giving his hand another reassuring squeeze as he stood. David made his way as quietly as possible to the side door that led to the corridor where the Sunday school rooms were located. Once in the hallway, David paused, taking a deep breath. He knew he was probably overreacting, that the chances of Calloway actually being here were slim. But the protective instinct that had been on high alert since the incident at school wouldn't let him relax until he was sure Mia was safe. He made his way to the bathroom first, figuring he might as well use it since he'd used it as an excuse. As he washed his hands afterward, the door opened, and David's blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway, looking just as shocked as David felt, was Richard Calloway. Time seemed to stand still as David and Calloway locked eyes. The sound of running water from the faucet faded into the background, drowned out by the pounding of David's heart in his ears. Calloway was the first to break the silence, his voice carefully neutral. "Officer Carter, what a surprise to see you here." David's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight as he fought to maintain his composure. It was then that he noticed the volunteer tag hanging around Calloway's neck, the words "Service Assistant" printed in bold letters. The sight of it made David's blood boil. How dare this man, who had caused so much pain to his family, stand here in a place of worship, pretending to be a changed man? "What are you doing here, Calloway?" David growled, his voice low and dangerous. Calloway held up his hands in a placating gesture, taking a step back. I'm here to serve, Officer Carter, to make amends for my past mistakes. I hope you are here for the same reason, and we can put everything that happened behind us." David took a menacing step forward, causing Calloway to back up further, out of the bathroom and into the corridor. "Put it behind us," David snarled, "after what you did to my daughter, to my family." Calloway's back hit the wall of the corridor, his eyes darting around nervously. Before either of them could say anything more, the sound of approaching footsteps caught their attention. "Mr. Carter, nice to see you again." It was Martha, the Sunday school teacher. She smiled brightly, seemingly oblivious to the tension between the two men. "Your daughter Mia is still with Hannah in the classroom. They're making some lovely crafts." Martha turned to Calloway, her smile never faltering. "Richard, we need to get ready. The baptism will be starting soon. Once the priest finishes the sermon, he'll be coming to baptize the children." David felt a fresh wave of anger wash over him. Calloway wasn't just volunteering. He was given duty to help around with the baptism. The thought of this man being anywhere near children, let alone taking any part in a sacred ceremony, made him feel physically ill. Martha seemed to finally notice the tension between David and Calloway. Her smile faltered slightly as she looked between them. Do you two know each other?" David's voice was tight as he responded. "Richard used to be my daughter's teacher at school, but not anymore." Martha's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, Richard did mention he used to be an elementary school teacher. What a small world." David couldn't hold back anymore. "The last time I saw him was in court 3 weeks ago." The color drained from Martha's face as the implications of David's words sank in. She giggled nervously, clearly unsure how to respond. "Well, I suppose you must have been on the same side then. And even if not, the Lord forgives all sins and mistakes of the past to whoever repents. He gives second chances to everyone." David's eyes never left Calloway as he responded to Martha, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "The Lord may be a just ruler, so he must be better at judging than some judges in our system." Martha nodded awkwardly, clearly sensing the tension but unsure how to address it. "Well, I'll see you both at the baptism. It's being held in the backyard where the pool is." With that, she hurried away, leaving David and Calloway alone in the corridor once more. As soon as Martha was out of earshot, David stepped closer to Calloway, his voice low and menacing. "Don't you dare get anywhere near Mia again. If you do, I'll make sure you end up behind bars for a very long time." Calloway's face paled, but he remained silent as David turned and walked away, his fists clenched at his sides. David's mind was racing as he made his way back to the Sunday school section. The knowledge that Calloway was not only in the same building as Mia, but also helping with the preparation of the baptism ceremony, filled him with a mixture of rage and fear. He couldn't bring himself to return to the main hall where Ava was waiting. Instead, he found himself outside Mia's classroom, peering through the window to keep an eye on his daughter. Mia seemed happy, engrossed in a craft project with Hannah and the other children. For a moment, David felt a pang of guilt. Should he disrupt this moment of normalcy and happiness for his daughter? But the thought of Calloway being anywhere near her overrode any hesitation. He pulled out his phone, quickly typing out a message to Ava, explaining the situation. Her reply came almost immediately, her shock and concern evident even through text. "We should take Mia and leave right now," Ava suggested. David considered this for a moment before replying. "Mia would be upset if she knew we were leaving because of Calloway. She can't know he's here. I'm keeping an eye on her." Ava's response was quick. "I hope we can protect her from him, but with the baptism happening, there's a big chance she'll see him, especially since he's serving." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Meet me at the Sunday school," he typed back. As he waited for Ava, David continued to watch Mia through the window. The children were starting to clean up their craft projects, signaling that the class was coming to an end. David's heart raced as he realized they would soon be heading out of the class and to the baptism area. Ava appeared at his side just as the classroom door opened and the students began filing out, led by a young blonde woman. Mia's face lit up when she saw her parents, but her smile faltered slightly when she noticed their serious expressions. David approached the teacher, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Excuse me, where are the children going now?" The woman smiled politely. "We're heading to the baptism area at the backyard. The children will be witnessing Hannah and the others being baptized." David nodded, then took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm afraid we need to take our daughter Mia home. We have a family matter to attend to." The teacher looked confused but didn't argue. She called Mia over, explaining that she needed to go with her parents. Mia's face fell as she realized what was happening. "But Dad," she protested, "we came here to see Hannah's baptism. Why do we have to leave?" David knelt down to Mia's level, his heart breaking at the disappointment in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Something important came up at the police station that I need to attend to. We have to go now." Ava stepped in, her voice gentle but firm. "Mia, honey, we know you're disappointed, but this is important. We'll explain more in the car, okay?" Mia nodded reluctantly, her lower lip trembling slightly as she said goodbye to Hannah. As they turned to leave, David noticed the blonde teacher was still waiting with Hannah and the other students. Ava, seemingly struck by a sudden thought of protecting her niece from Calloway too, approached the teacher again. "Excuse me, but would it be possible for us to take Hannah with us? She's actually our niece, and we'd like to spend some time with her before the baptism." The teacher shook her head apologetically. "I'm sorry, but I can't release Hannah to anyone but her parents. They're waiting for her at the baptism site, and I'm not familiar enough with you to make that decision. I hope you understand." Ava nodded, disappointment clear on her face. "Of course I understand. Thank you anyway." As the teacher led the remaining children towards the backyard, David, Ava, and Mia made their way back to the main hall. The service was just ending, and they found themselves caught in the crowd of people exiting the building. After a while, in the confusion and press of bodies, as they stepped outside the immaculate grand wooden door and prepared to descend the steep steps back to their car, David suddenly realized with a jolt of panic that Mia was no longer beside them. He grabbed Ava's arm, his voice tight with fear. "Where's Mia?" Panic surged through David and Ava as they scanned the crowd for any sign of their daughter. The sea of unfamiliar faces seemed to close in around them, making their search all the more frantic. "She must have gone to the baptism site," Ava said, her voice trembling. "She was so upset about missing it." David nodded, already pushing his way toward the back of the church, fighting against the flow of the crowd. "Let's go. We need to find her before—" He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence, the thought of Calloway anywhere near Mia, too horrifying to voice. They pushed their way through the crowd, David's police training kicking in as he scanned the area methodically. As they neared the exit to the backyard, they spotted a security guard. David hurried over to him. Excuse me, we've been separated from our daughter. She's 7, wearing a blue dress, and this was her first time at the church to witness her cousin's baptism. We're worried she might be lost. Have you seen her?" The guard's expression softened with concern. "I haven't, but let me help you look. The baptism is happening in the backyard. I'll show you the way." As they followed the guard, David's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. He tried to push them aside, focusing instead on the task at hand, finding Mia. They reached the baptism site, a small pool set up in the church's backyard. Children in white robes were lining up near the water, but there was no sign of Mia or Calloway. Ava spotted the changing rooms and decided to check there. "I'll look inside," she said to David. "Wait here in case she comes out." David nodded, his eyes constantly scanning the area. He saw Hannah's parents and approached them quickly. "Have you seen Mia?" he asked, trying to keep the desperation out of his voice. Hannah's father, Robbie, shook his head. "No, we haven't seen her. Is everything all right?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "Some of her friends are over there." He gestured toward the line of children. Before David could respond, Ava emerged from the changing room, Mia in tow. Relief washed over David, but it was short-lived as he noticed the confused and slightly frightened look on his daughter's face. "She was looking for Hannah," Ava explained, her voice low. "I found her in the changing room with the other kids. She was searching for her." David knelt down in front of Mia. "Sweetheart, you can't wander off like that. You scared us." Mia's lower lip trembled. "I'm sorry, Daddy. I just wanted to see Hannah get baptized. I never saw one." David's heart clenched at the disappointment in her voice. He was about to respond when he noticed Martha and the Sunday school teacher approaching, a worried look on their face. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her eyes darting between David, Ava, and Mia. "We're fine now," Ava replied. "We just got separated for a moment. Have you seen Hannah?" The teacher's brow knitted in concern. "She was here. I left her with Mr. Calloway after she changed into her baptism robe, before the next group of students arrived. I had to step out to assist with the other children. They were supposed to be waiting for the priest." David felt his blood run cold at the mention of Calloway's name. He exchanged a quick glance with Ava, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. "Where exactly did you left them?" David asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. The teacher gestured toward the edge of the pool. "Right here. This is where I left Hannah with her friends." Scanning the line of children, she added, "All of her friends are here, only Hannah is missing." David's police instincts took over. He asked the Sunday school teacher to question the kids if any of them had seen Hannah leave with Mr. Calloway. After a moment, one boy pointed toward the far end of the backyard. Robbie frowned. "What's over there?" Martha quickly replied, "There's an exit door. It leads out to a small back road." David turned to Ava, his voice low and urgent. "Stay here with Mia. I'm going to look for Hannah." Ava nodded, pulling Mia tightly to her side. David then turned to Robbie, Hannah's father. "Come with me. We need to find your daughter." He glanced over at Clara next. "Clara, please stay here with Ava for safety. We'll bring Mia back." As they moved quickly towards the exit door, David flagged down the security guard who had helped them earlier. "We might need your help," he said. "A child might be in danger." The three men moved quickly toward the far end of the backyard, where they spotted an exit gate. They pushed it open and stepped out onto the narrow back road. David's eyes darted across the area, scanning for any trace of Calloway or Hannah, but there was no one. They moved along the perimeter for a while, circling around the back of the church. Then David spotted it, Calloway's car parked near a secluded garden area. By the passenger door stood Calloway, guiding a small figure in a white robe into the vehicle. David's heart pounded in his chest as he broke into a run, Robbie and the security guard close behind him. "Calloway!" he shouted. "Stop right there!" David's shout seemed to startle Calloway, who looked up with wide eyes before quickly slamming the car door shut. He scrambled around to the driver's side, fumbling with his keys. "Call 911!" David yelled to Robbie as they ran. He could hear Robbie's breathless voice behind him, quickly relaying the situation to the emergency dispatcher. As they closed the distance, David saw Calloway finally manage to get his key in the ignition. The car's engine roared to life, and it began to reverse. Without hesitation, David sprinted forward and threw himself against the side of the car, the impact sending a jolt of pain through his body. But he didn't let go, his hands gripping the door handle tightly. "Stop the car, Calloway!" David shouted, his face inches from the driver's side window. "It's over." Inside the car he could see Hannah, her eyes wide with fear as she huddled in the passenger seat. Calloway's face was a mask of panic and determination as he continued to reverse, trying to shake David off. The security guard had caught up now, and with a swift motion, he brought his keys down on the driver's side mirror, shattering it. The sudden noise and impact caused Calloway to jerk the steering wheel, momentarily losing control. In that split second, David heard the welcome sound of police sirens approaching. 3 police cars came into view, quickly blocking the exit of the small road. Realizing he was trapped, Calloway slammed on the brakes. The sudden stop nearly threw David off balance, but he managed to keep his grip on the car. "It's over, Calloway," David said, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of the car with your hands up, now." For a moment, Calloway froze, his eyes flicking between David, the approaching police officers, and Hannah sitting in the passenger seat. As 6 officers surrounded the car, guns drawn, tension hung thick in the air. Then slowly and deliberately, Calloway raised his hands and eased the car door open. As soon as Calloway was out of the vehicle, 2 officers rushed forward to secure him. David immediately went to the passenger side, opening the door and helping a trembling Hannah out of the car. "It's okay, Hannah," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. "You're safe now. Your dad is right here." Robbie rushed forward, gathering his daughter in his arms. "Oh, Hannah," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Thank God you're okay." As the police officers led Calloway to one of the cruisers, David approached them. "I want every piece of evidence possible," he told the lead officer. "We need to make sure he gets the maximum punishment this time." The officer nodded, recognizing David. "We'll do a full sweep of the car and get all the CCTV footage from the church. Don't worry, Detective Carter. We'll build an airtight case this time." David watched as Calloway was placed in the back of the police car, a mixture of relief and lingering anger coursing through him. It was over, but the weight of what could have happened settled heavily on his shoulders. He turned back towards the church, where he could see a crowd gathering at the exit door. Among them, he spotted Ava and Mia, their faces a mixture of confusion and concern. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The peaceful Sunday afternoon had transformed into a chaotic scene of police interviews, evidence collection, and shocked onlookers. David found himself at the center of it all, his role as both a police officer and a father to one of Calloway's victims, putting him in a unique position. As he gave his statement to one of the officers, David couldn't help but notice the stunned faces of the church congregation. Many of them were parents of the children set to be baptized, now huddled in small groups, whispering anxiously among themselves and casting wary glances toward the police presence. It was clear that the idea of such a crime happening in their place of worship had shaken them to their core. The baptism ceremony had been abruptly cancelled, with many of the families quickly departing, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding drama. The priest, still in his ceremonial robes, was speaking with a group of officers, his face pale and drawn. David's attention was drawn to a commotion near one of the police cruisers. A team of officers had returned from searching Calloway's car, and from the grim expressions on their faces, it was clear they had found something significant. "Detective Carter," one of the officers called out, motioning for David to join them. "You need to see this." David excused himself from the officer taking his statement and made his way over to the group. As he approached, he could see that they were handling evidence bags with extreme care. "What did you find?" David asked, his voice low and tense. The lead officer held up 3 evidence bags. One contained a handful of familiar drug-laced lollipops, confirming that Calloway was still using them and that the drug distribution was ongoing. Another bag held what appeared to be an adult magazine. The third contained a small photo album. "We found these in Calloway's glove compartment," the officer explained, his tone grim. "The album? It's filled with photos of various young to teenage black girls, including some of your daughter, sir, and several of Hannah, all of them taken candidly." David felt his stomach lurch at the sight of the photos. The implications of what Calloway had been planning, not just today but potentially for weeks or even months, made him feel physically ill. "This is critical evidence," David said, steadying his voice to maintain a professional tone despite the storm of emotions within him. "Ensure it's processed and logged securely. We need to build an airtight case this time. This could be the key to winning." The officers nodded, moving away to continue processing the evidence. David took a deep breath, trying to center himself. He knew that this discovery would be devastating for the families involved, but it was also the key to ensuring Calloway would face serious consequences for his actions. He made his way back to where Ava, Mia, and Hannah's parents were waiting. As he approached, he could see the worry and fear etched on their faces. "David," Ava said, her voice trembling slightly, "what's going on?" "What did they find?" David glanced at Mia and Hannah, who were sitting together on a nearby bench, looking scared and confused. He lowered his voice, addressing the adults. "They found some disturbing items in Calloway's car. Evidence that he's been watching and photographing young girls, including Mia and Hannah." Clara, Hannah's mother, let out a choked sob, while Robbie's face hardened with anger. Ava covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. "I need to ask you both," David continued, looking at Hannah's parents, "to be prepared to fight this in court. We need to make sure Calloway doesn't get another chance at probation. He needs to be put away for a long time." Robbie nodded firmly. "We'll do whatever it takes. That monster can't be allowed near children ever again." As they discussed the next steps, David couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. The connection between Calloway and the drug operation he had been investigating suddenly seemed clearer than ever. This case had become about more than just his family or even the church community. It was about protecting all children from monsters like Calloway. The sound of approaching footsteps made David turn. It was Detective Lawson, looking grim but determined. "Carter," he said, nodding in greeting. "I came as soon as I heard. Looks like your day off turned into quite the operation." David nodded, a wave of exhaustion washing over him, but his resolve remained firm. "Mark, we need to discuss how this ties into our ongoing investigation. The evidence we've gathered makes it clear. The drug operation is still active and the higher-ups need to be informed. The case has stalled long enough. Something needs to be done." Lawson's expression turned serious. "Agreed, let's debrief back at the station. We need to coordinate with the team and figure out our next move." As David prepared to leave with Lawson, he turned back to his family. Mia was looking up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. He knelt down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sweetheart, I have to go to the station now to help with some important work, but I promise you, we're going to make sure that Mr. Calloway can't hurt anyone ever again. You're safe now." Mia nodded, her lower lip trembling slightly. "You'll come home soon, right, Daddy?" David pulled her into a tight hug. "As soon as I can, honey, I love you so much." As he stood to leave, David exchanged a look with Ava. There was so much unsaid between them. Fear, relief, determination. But in that moment, they both knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey ahead. "I'll call you as soon as I can," David promised, giving Ava's hand a quick squeeze before turning to follow Lawson. As they walked towards the police vehicles, David noticed that several officers remained at the church. They were spreading out, approaching various members of the congregation and church staff. "We're gathering statements from all possible witnesses," Lawson explained, noticing David's gaze. "The priest, the Sunday school teachers, other volunteers, anyone who might have interacted with Calloway or noticed anything suspicious." David nodded, his mind racing. "What about the church staff? Did they know about Calloway's background?" Lawson's expression turned grim. "That's one of the things we're looking into. Preliminary interviews suggest that many of the church staff and volunteers were aware of Calloway's history. They welcomed him, citing religious teachings about second chances and redemption." David felt a surge of anger mixed with confusion. They knew about his conviction and still let him work with children. "It appears they believed he deserved the chance probation offered him," Lawson replied, his tone neutral, though his eyes reflected David's frustration. "Calloway spread rumors that he was falsely accused by black individuals, and shockingly, convinced many people to sympathize with him and take his side. We're still trying to determine exactly how much they knew and who authorized his involvement as a volunteer." David looked back at the church, and for a while he watched as the remaining officers continued their interviews. They spoke with the priest, who explained how Calloway had come to them, expressing deep remorse and a desire to make amends. The church, believing in the power of redemption, had welcomed him with open arms. Martha, still visibly shaken, recounted how Calloway had been a model volunteer, always eager to help and seemingly gentle with the children. "We thought he had changed," she said, her voice trembling. "We wanted to believe in second chances." The officers carefully documented each statement, knowing that every piece of information could be crucial in building a case against Calloway, and understanding how he had managed to integrate himself so seamlessly into the church community. As the interviews progressed, a picture began to emerge of a community that had been all too willing to accept Calloway's apparent reformation, while conveniently ignoring the fact that he no longer had a license to work with children. The Sunday school teacher who had been with Hannah earlier was particularly distraught. "He was always so helpful," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "I never imagined. I left Hannah with him. How could I have been so blind?" Lawson patted David's shoulder and said quietly, "Take a moment, David. Go check on your family. I'll handle things here." Actually, Lawson, I'm coming with you, David said firmly, his jaw tightening. I've heard enough. David gave one last wave to his family and Hannah's, his eyes lingering on Mia for a moment longer, then turned and followed Lawson to the car. As they reached the police car, David paused, looking back at the church. The once peaceful Sunday morning scene had been transformed into a hive of police activity. He could see Martha, the kind Sunday school teacher who had greeted them earlier, speaking with an officer, her face pale and shocked. "I can't believe they would take such a risk," David muttered, shaking his head. Lawson placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's why we're here, Carter, to make sure this doesn't happen again. Now let's get back to the station. We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they drove away from the church, David's mind was already racing, connecting the dots between Calloway, the drug operation, and this new evidence. He knew that the coming days and weeks would be challenging, but he was more determined than ever to see this through. As they settled into the conference room at the police station, surrounded by case files and evidence reports, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. This case had become about more than just his family, the church community, or even the whole black community. It was about protecting all children from monsters like Calloway and dismantling the systems that allowed them to operate. With determination in his eyes, David turned to Lawson. "Let's get to work. We've got a long night ahead of us." Lawson nodded, his expression mirroring David's resolve. "Indeed we do, Carter. Indeed we do."